Hello, welcome to Conway Video. I want to do a video about cross-device testing. So this video is going to be about cross-device testing and some thoughts I have on that. Um, so let's get into it. Cross-device testing, why do we need to do it? So okay, as application developers, typically UI developers, user interface developers, front-end developers, so on, but just generally as application developers, we're building interfaces that are going to be used on more than one kind of device. So you have your desktop or laptop computer users, people who are sitting there with a keyboard and mouse or with a keyboard and trackpad. Then you have your phone users, people using these devices. And then you have your watch users. You have maybe people using watches. That's probably a little bit more rare, but sometimes it happens. And then you've got users on tablets. So you've got your small tablets or your large tablets or what have you. And then as developers, we need to build interfaces that work with these different devices. And in the past, this involved working with different kinds of browsers, and different browsers had different ways of handling the code, or also different native APIs. These days, that's a bit less of a problem because we have abstraction layers. So for native applications, we've got things like React Native, and then for web applications, we have browsers. We have standards for HTML and JavaScript and so on that have pretty much converged on a central kind of set of supported features. So we can generally write code that runs cross-platform now. That problem has largely been solved. But occasionally we do find there's a difference between how something works or looks or renders on one device and how it renders on another. And then we have to go in and debug the problem and find a solution and fix it. And I guess that's where I begin my thoughts on cross-device development. One of the places to begin is that it's important to be ready. It's good to be ready to diagnose and debug issues on different kinds of devices. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to test everything we do on 6 or more different devices. Most of the time, what we build is going to work on different devices just fine, as long as we've done one thing, which is very important, which is responsive design. We've set up our user interface so that it can work in a responsive way, so that if the device has a smaller screen, then the content will fit into that smaller screen area. And if the device has a larger screen, such as a desktop, then the content will spread out and we can put everything in different places. So the first thing is kind of responsive design. Or if you're writing a native app, it might look more like having different versions of your app for different devices. But I would put all that under the category of basically supporting different screen sizes and building your interface to support those layouts. But then as a second thing, I guess what you want to do is to have the ability to go in and debug your application on different devices. And that doesn't mean you have to do that all the time and constantly test it on those different devices, because that would be very time consuming. But it means that if and when you need to, if and when something goes wrong on a particular device, like say an Android phone or an iPad or some other specific device, you want to be able to go in, get your application running on that device, and then debug it. Now, the way that tends to work, there is another thing, by the way, that you can do as well, which is to set up emulators. Emulators are software that is basically emulating or simulating. It's basically pretending to be the device, but it's actually just a piece of software running on your development machine. So you install that software, you run that program comes up with what looks like a screen of a device, and then inside that screen you can actually install your application or go to your website and you can get it running, and then you can see how it looks, and maybe you can do a bit of debugging, change a few things and see how it responds. So the main two emulators, and I'll put links into the description of the video, the main two that you can use are the iOS or iOS emulator, which is built into Xcode, and you can run that on a Mac. And then the second one is the Android SDK, and that's for emulating Android devices. And that's because the two most common devices you're going to find out there in the wild are Apple devices and Android devices. So you can install those emulators and you can get them running on your development machine, and they'll come up and you'll be able to access, if you're building a web application, you'll be able to access your web application. Now there's a little bit of setup you need to do, which can be a bit tricky if you're running a web application, and that is you need to set it up so that you can browse to your local host and see your application that's locally running in the device. This is very important because when you want to start to debug or fix a problem, fix something, you want to see the application as it's running. And then if you want to be able to make a change to your code, you want to maybe change this element or change this JavaScript statement and then refresh the code in the emulator. And it will be just like refreshing it in your regular browser. But in this case, you're refreshing it in the emulator because you want to see how it's going to behave in the actual device. Now, in case the emulator isn't enough, if the emulator doesn't, maybe you have a problem and you can't reproduce that problem inside the emulator, or maybe you have a problem and you try to fix the problem, but the fix just doesn't work in the emulator. Or maybe the fix works in the emulator, but it doesn't seem to work on the device. So then you need to actually get a physical device and then test your application in that device. That's where you can then start to look at getting a representative device. Maybe there's an iPhone you can get hold of, which you can use to verify, to test how the application works on iDevices generally. Or you can get an iPad. Most companies, if they have a fairly significant software IT budget and software development team, they will have a few devices around in the office. Or if that doesn't work out, sometimes individual developers will come in and have their own devices that they bring into work, and you can use those devices. So BYOD, right? Bring your own device. That's another way. But hopefully, if you're in a large enough company with a large enough tech budget, then they can actually provide you the devices that you need to do your testing. So then you need to connect those devices to your development machine. There's a process there too. It can be a little bit tricky. You basically need to be on the same network. So you want to double check that if you have Wi-Fi at the office, that both your development machine and your testing devices are on the same Wi-Fi network. If you have a cable network, you might need to plug those devices into the network, a cable network if possible. And if it's an Apple device or even an Android device, you might need a special kind of adapter for that. Or you might need to set up some sort of a local area Wi-Fi and tether in that kind of way. There are lots of different ways to do it, but generally the easiest and the most common way is through the Wi-Fi. So you log on to the company Wi-Fi with all of your devices, and then the next step is that your device has to be able to access your development machine if it's a website that you're testing. If it's an application, you also might need to download your application, build it, and download it into the device and install it on the device and then run it. But assuming it's a web application, you then need to access the URL of your development machine. So then you need to get the URL of your development machine, find out what that is. There's ways to do that. And I'll post some links in the description about how you can do that. And then once you've got the URL of your development machine, you can then put that URL into the device and hopefully your application will come up. There may be a few things you have to work through before that will work. So one is the firewall. You may have to turn off the firewall on your development machine. Another thing is you may need to get a firewall turned off on the router or the router in your company. So you might need to contact IT support about that. A third thing you might need to do is set up your development machine, so that it actually serves from the correct IP address or DNS address. So you might need to find out what the IP address of your development machine is, or what the DNS address is, and then make sure that when you access that address in your development machine, that address actually does come up with a website. So you want to make sure that your development machine is able to respond to requests for that address, because it may not be configured that way. But once that works, and then you can access the website from your device, you're pretty much 90% there. You have your website or your application on your device, you can see it, you can make changes to your code on your development machine, and you can immediately see the effect it's going to have on your device. And then if there's a bug, you can reproduce the bug, and then if you have a fix that you've put in, you can test that fix. The ideal thing, as with any kind of development, it's the same rule with devices. It's to get quick iteration loops. You want to get quick iteration loops, quick feedback. You want to make a change to the code and very quickly be able to see the impact and the result of that change within seconds, ideally even milliseconds. You want to be able to see that change. And so setting up your devices in this way will give you so that you can quickly see your changes, will make it much easier for you to then make the changes, make the fixes, and get the code working as quickly as possible. So there you have it. That's my little rant on cross-device testing, and there's a lot more to this topic to explore, but I'd say that what I've just told you is probably the basics and the most important stuff. And I may do a video in future going a bit more in depth on that topic. But for the time being, check out the links in the video description. Thank you for watching.